and welcome to Code Harvest. In this video, we will be demonstrating step by step how you can create a working shopping cart using JavaScript, which features many functions, all described in the pinned comment down below. This is part 1 of the tutorial of the shopping cart's functionality. The full playlist, which includes the design, is also in the playlist link down below. Now, let's start the video. Alright, so now we have already designed our shopping cart. If you haven't seen the design yet, please do check out the playlist link in the description or top pinned comment down below. So now we're going to create the shopping cart's functionality. So here we're going to head over to our JavaScript file called app handler. And so we only have a navigation bar effect here where the user is able to, when the user scrolls down, a box shadow appears, making the navigation bar look 3D, and it basically also is kind of a subtle hint to tell the user that there's more stuff up ahead, so the user can scroll back up. And yeah, so we're going to now create another function in our add event listener. So this basically is responsible for ensuring that the whole document is loaded. So once everything in the all the contents or the document is already loaded, all of the elements, the order, the structure, all of that is already loaded, then these lines of codes are executed. So now we're going to add another function where the user basically, where the shopping cart basically, like when the user clicks on the cart button, the shopping cart hides and opens based on what they clicked. So if they click on the cart button, it should show. If they click on this arrow button, it should hide. So we're going to create a comment first, and we're going to call this view cart. And then we are going to, we want to select an element, so we're going to use document query selector. And so the document is able to select the element that we specify in these parentheses. And basically we want to select the cart button. So now we can hide the shopping cart since we're working on the functionality and the design is already done. So let's set it to its original or default value, which is the visibility should be hidden. So the whole shopping cart should not be visible. And so until the user clicks on this button. So when we check our HTML file, we can see here in the navigation bar that the file, or I mean the element, is called cart button, and it is a class. And it is a class that is in the nav container. So we're going to select, just like in CSS, the element that we want to select. So the container, or where it is in, is called nav, and then we're going to select the particular element that is in the navigation bar that we want to select, which is the cart button. And so for this cart button, we want to add an event listener, and the type of event listener, or the type of event that we want this cart button to listen for, is for a click. And so when the user does click, when the cart button does listen and does hear a click or feels a click, then a particular function should occur. So now we can add the name of the function. We're not going to create the function here. However, we can state its name and then create it aside or outside of this scope. And we're going to call this open cart view. And then we're also going to create another one for close cart. And we're just basically going to select it almost the same way. However, we're selecting it with different elements. So for the close cart button, this should be executed only when the user clicks on this arrow, which should be the button that should close the shopping cart, and it should no longer be visible. So when we check our HTML file, down right here we have created a button called close button that is next to our heading. So we're going to select it, but we're first going to select it with the container name, which we have called cart window. I will just select it with cart box. So when we head over to our JavaScript file, we're going to select the cart box container, and then we want it to specifically select the element that we have called close button. And so when this is selected, then the function called close cart view should be executed. So now we're going to specify, we're going to implement these codes. So the first one is called open cart view, and it's very simple code because we have already added the properties through the active class. So all we need to do is add the active class so that these properties will be implemented onto the shopping cart. So the element that is responsible for holding everything that is in the shopping cart, when we check our HTML file, it is called cart window. It is responsible for everything that is in the shopping cart. So when we check our CSS file, we can see that we have added two properties, one called background color and one called visibility. So, and we added these, we set these to visible, and we set these to be half transparent when it should be transparent, just so that we could change the progress of the shopping cart, so that we could we could properly design our shopping cart. So now that our shopping cart is designed, we'll set the visibility to hidden instead, and we'll also set the background color to 0. So it should be fully transparent at first, and when the active class is added, then it should be half transparent, the background color, and the visibility should be set to visible. And we're also working with the background color just so that the transition from no background to a background color will be smooth. So yeah, so that's why. So now we're going to select this element called cart window, and we're going to select it with our query selector, and the element that we want to specifically select is the cart window. And because it is an ID, we'll select it with a hashtag, so just like we would in CSS. So now what we want to do is we want it to access the classes that are in cart window, so we're going to specify the class list property. And then what we want it to do is we're going to add a method which should, we want it to add a class. And this class, we're going to call it active class. So when the active class is added into this element, then the properties that we added for the active class will be implemented instead, and will override the background color and the visibility property that we added in CSS above. So now when we check our theory, we can see that when we click on the cart button, the cart button appears. And also now we're going to add one for close. So it's just going to basically have similar properties. However, we're going to add a class before we continue. So this one is called view cart, and this one is called close cart. And so now we want the cart window to be selected, but this time when the close cart view is supposed to be executed, so when the arrow button is selected, then we want the active class to be removed. And so now when we select the cart button, we can see the shopping cart appears. When we click it again, the shopping cart is hidden. However, you can see that the effect is very manual, it's too mechanical, it's not smooth at all. So we're going to work on our CSS file. So another property that we added in our CSS file was in cart box, and cart box is basically holding everything that is in the white elements that we saw. And so we set the width property to, we set it to its actual value, which is 35% minus the padding spacing. However, now that we only added this just so that we could see the progress of our cart box, so now that we already know how our cart box looks like, we can set the width value to 0. And then we also need to change the padding spacing. So we want the transition to happen from no shopping cart to shopping cart to only, we want the transition to happen through the width. So the height should not change, only the width should change, and it should be a smooth transition. So because there are two elements that are affecting the width, which is the width property itself and the padding spacing, as it also affects the width of the cart box. So we also need to set the padding box to 0, the padding spacing to 0. However, we don't want the height to be affected, so we're going to set the height value of, or like the top and bottom value padding spacing to how it is. However, we're only going to set the width or the vertical or the left and right padding spacing to 0. So this first value affects the height, the top and bottom spacing, and then the second value affects the width, the left and right spacing. So we want the left and right spacing to be set to 0, but the one that affects the height, which is top and bottom, should not be changed basically. So now when we check our shopping cart, we can see that there's a smooth transition from shopping cart to no shopping cart. So our transition is much smoother now. Alright, so now we're going to be working on adding an item to a cart. So now we can close our shopping cart. So now when an item, when the user orders an item through clicking the order button, then it should basically add the item into the shopping cart. So now we're going to head over to our JavaScript file, and up ahead we're going to create a comment in this DOM content loaded domain. So what we want to do is add a comment, and we're going to call this add to cart. Alright, so now the first thing that we want to do is we want to select all of the order buttons that are in this page. And so when the user clicks on it, it should add the item into the shopping cart. So we have to add an event listener to each of these order buttons, and not just one of them, but all of them. So we're going to select them through query selector all this time. And then the name of, the element. So when we check our HTML file, we can see down below that each element has a button called order button. So we called it a simple name. So because it is a class, we'll select it with a dot and then the name of the class called order button. So when we can't just add an event listener, because it won't add an event listener to all of these items, because query selector all returns a list instead and not just each element separate. So we're going to have to create a for each, or a loop basically. So we're going to use the for each method in order to create a loop. And the first thing that we want to do is we have to first specify the name of the variable that each button in the list should be referred as. So we're going to refer each button that is in the list as button. So it can be any name that you want it to be, button, or the proper name, or the full name, or B, whatever it is, or I. So we're going to create an arrow function. And so now in this function we want to add an event listener. So we're going to select the variable which we referred, where we're going to refer each element as. So as the loop goes on from first element to second element, like the first element is called button, and then when it moves on to the second element, it selects the second element and refers it as button this time, and it continues for all the elements in the list. So we're going to add an event listener to all of these elements as the loop goes. And so we're going to specifically add the click event. And then what we want to do is we are going to create a function that has parameters. And because it has parameters, we can't just add the name, and we can't just add the name just like we did for open cart view and close cart view. So we're going to create an arrow function instead, and then specify the name of the function that is going to be executed. So this function is going to be called add to cart, and then we can add the arguments in. So now before we add the arguments, we first need to include the variables. So we're going to create a variable called user cart, and we're creating this variable because we want to store in the name of the variable that will store all of the list items. So when we check our HTML file, we should see that there is a element called that we added a unordered list, and this unordered list stores all of the list items of the shopping cart. So we want to be able to select this list so that we can add an element into this list. So when we check our HTML page right here, we can see that we added an unordered list element. So however, we're going to have to specify where it is, which is in the cart items container. And so we want to select this element, and we want to add whatever whatever item was added through the order button, that item should be added into the unordered list for the cart items container. So we are going to, I think I selected, okay. So we're going to we're going to use document query selector in order to select this element, and we're going to specify where it is in. And because the cart items container is an ID, we'll select it with a hashtag, and then we're going to specify the name, and then we are going to specify the elements that we want to select specifically in the cart items container, and which is called unordered list. So we can end it there. Now we're going to add this as an argument to add to cart function. So this will be considered because we are creating a variable for this, because we are going to be using this element again, so that we can add the white fade overflow above and below this element. So we are going to be using it multiple times. So we're going to create the variable here so that we don't have to create or declare a new variable inside the functions again and again, because it kind of makes the code a little bit redundant. So we're just going to declare it once and for all over here. So now we're going to add user cart as an argument, and then we also want to specifically get the button so that we can get the we can get the element that was clicked through the button, so that we can get the image, we can get the title, we can get the price, so that we can add this information in order to create a list item in the shopping cart. So we're also going to include the button element as well. So now we're going to create its function here. So now we're going to create a new function, and we're going to call it add to cart, and then we're going to specify, because it has parameters, it has variables that are being passed and that will be used in the function. We're going to specify the names, and it should be in order just like we set it up above. Alright, so now what we want to do is we want to select the element that was basically added, so that we can get its information, its image, title, and price. So we are going to create a new variable, and we're going to call this add item. So in this variable, what we're going to do is we're going to store the information, the cart item, and however, we only passed in the button of the cart item but not the cart item itself. And in order to select that, we're going to use parent element in order to access this. However, when we check our HTML file, we can see in our order button class that the parent element of order button is like the direct parent element is product text. That is its parent element. However, we want to select the whole element, the whole list item, so that we can, so all of this so that we can get its information. So we are going to have to again get the parent element of this element, which is list item. So list item is the parent element of this, and this is the parent element of order button. So we're going to have to specify parent element just 2 times. So it gets the parent elements, the parent element of the parent elements of the order button, if that makes sense. So now this has or stores the list item, so now we have all of the information. And so the second variable that we're going to create is going to be called add item image. And through this we are going to select the image. And so we can select the image by first specifying the list item, so add item stores in the list, the whole list item, and then we are going to add a query selector. So we want the that item that was selected through the order button to look for an image, and we only need the source of the image really. So first we can check in our HTML file that we wanted to look for this image specifically, which is particularly in the image container class. So we are going to specify the elements, the container that the image is in, which is the image container class, and then we can specify the elements that we want to select, which is the image element. So we're going to specify the element, and then however we only want to get the file, so we can get the file through the source attribute, which is called SRC, standing for source. So we can just specify that property here, and it will return the file, basically the file path of that image. And then the next variable that we're going to create is going to be called add item name. So then this is going to we want to specifically look for the elements that stores in the name. So when we check our HTML file, we can see that it is in a class called product text, and it also has a class called title. So it's a title that is part of the product text class, so that is its container. So we're going to select it through its container called product text, and then the name of the elements class that we want to select, which is title. And so we want to get the text content. We don't just want the element itself, but we want to get the text content of the element. So we're going to specify this with text content. And then the next variable we're going to add is add item price. We want to get the price of that element of that item, so we can use add item in order to select this class, in order to look for this class where it is stored in. So we've created a class where it's called price. So once again, we are going to use the same container selection, product text, and then the name of the element that we want to specifically take is price. And then through this element we only want to get the text content once again, basically what it says in text. So we're just going to specify that we want to take the text content. And then another thing we want to do is we only want to get the price. We don't want to get the $sign. We only want to get the numbers, because we are going to add our own $sign. So we are going to use this special method called substring. Alright, so basically what we can add inside is going to basically determine from what part of the element it's going to select. So for example, if we start from 1, because positioning starts from 0, right? So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So the first position is 0. So if we add the index 1, it will ignore the first element, it will ignore the first item in the list, and it will start from the second element that is in the list that it returns. If we specify from 2, so 0 is the first, 1 second, 2 third, so it will ignore the first 2 elements previously. So 0 and 1, the elements that are in position 0 and the element that is in position 1 will be ignored, and it will start from, or it will return an element that starts from position 2 and beyond. So we want to ignore the $sign, and the $sign is the first element in the text. So we are going to specify, we want the elements to basically return 11.99, which starts from the second element. So we are going to, or the second letter. So we're going to, because positioning starts from 0, we're going to specify the index value of 1 rather than 2, because 2 is the third. So position 1 is the element that we want to go for. And now we can create a new item. So we're going to create a new variable because we're going to store in the basically the HTML design or the HTML structure of an item that is going to be added into the shopping cart. The designing has already been done, is already specified, so we just need to add the HTML structure through JavaScript. So we're going to use these special characters, and they should probably be in your keyboard near the escape key. We're adding this because we're going to be using special characters. So when we check our HTML file, we already created the list item which designs the a cart item in the shopping cart. So you can see we already designed how a cart item will look like. So when we check our HTML file, we can see in here this is the list item which basically holds the structure. So we're going to select this because we're going to be adding the list items no longer manually but through JavaScript, and then we're going to be pasting this here instead. Alright, so now we have the list item. However, what we want to do, obviously not all of the images will not be an ice cream that is the fifth ice cream image that is in the ice cream file. It will be from different files. So we just want to specifically get the item that was selected, and we already specified here. And so we're just going to change the source, and we're going to change the source into the source that we specified here in add item image. And because we already specified this in the add item image variable, we can just add it in here. So we're going to specifically get this variable, and we're going to store it here through these special characters $sign with curly brackets, and then inside the curly brackets we can add the variable name, and the variable name is called add item image. So now we can also change the alternative text because not all of them will be strawberry, vanilla, ice cream. However, we can add the name of that item through add item name, which stores in the name of the item that we selected specifically. So we are going to again add the special characters $sign with the curly brackets, and then inside we can add the variable name, which is called add item name. And then we also want to add the same name for when we specify the name of that element. So we are going to change the span element text, and because not all of them will be strawberry ice cream, so we are going to add the add item name variable in order to get the specific name of the item that was clicked through the order button. And then the price will also change and will not be the same, and so we want to select the price through the add item price variable, and we are going to specify the name of that variable which stores in the price of the item that we selected through the order button. And so now this should be fine. However, it has not worked yet because we now need to add this into our cart. So we're going to now use this variable which we have called user cart. And with user cart, we want to be able to access the content of user cart, and we want to add an item inside to be part of the user cart content. So we're going to be using inner HTML, and then here we can add this variable which we have stored, this list item document structure. We called it new item, so we can just add the variable name new item. However, we are not going to add this item alone. There are going to be multiple items, so we just can't assign it to one item. So we're going to use the plus equal operator instead. So now when we check our shopping cart, we can see it's empty. So now when we add an item, for example French fries, we can see that a French fries item has been added, or Frankie chicken, we can see that item has been added. Milky shake, Benjamin burger, or chunky nuggets, flaming fryers, we can see that all these items have been added. And also we can see that our scrolling effect has also been enabled. However, we don't have the scrolling effect for the top part, which we will be working on next. And then we can, however, now we cannot delete any of the items yet since we haven't added the functionality yet. So now we can see that our add to cart function works. Alright, so now the next thing that we're going to be working on is the white overflow fade effect. So that shows and basically hints to the user that there are more items up or down. So remember, we've created two classes, top and bottom. However, they all have one common class. So let's just find it here. So white fade overflow, and then there's one for the top and one for the bottom, and that's what we're going to be adding into our UL, into our list. So now after add to cart, we are going to create another comment, and this one we will call cart scroll effect. Now we are going to be using this unordered list, and this is why we also declared it here once so that we don't have to declare it again and again. So we're going to use that same variable. But first we are going to add an event listener. So we are going to add an event listener to our list, and this specific event that we're going to be listening for is for scroll. So when the browser detects that the user is scrolling through the user card, so the user card is being scrolled over, then particular function that we will create will be executed. So this function will include arguments. So we're going to have to create an R function, and then the name, which we'll call cart scroll effect, and then the parentheses that we're going to add is just, the arguments they're going to pass is just user cart. So now let's scroll over to the bottom, and now we can create another comment. Once again, cart scroll effect and a name. So we're going to be using this variable. We're going to be using user cards so that we can add the white fade overflow on top of it or on the bottom of it. However, we added position absolute, so that takes the element out of these two elements out of the document flow, so that it will not be particularly, it will be on top. Like for example, this one we specified that the top value is 0, so this one will be on top, this one will be at the bottom, but it will be in front rather than just above. So the first thing that we're going to do is create a variable for top fade, and we're going to select this element since it is in our HTML file, and we already specified in our HTML file, so it is a class. So we're going to use a dot in order to select it, and it is called white fade overflow. And for top fade, it's the one with the class top. So when we check our HTML file, we can see over here that we have the white fade overflow top, both same class in the same element, and then the unordered list, and then the one for the bottom. Alright, so now we're going to do the same for bottom fade. Alright, so now what we're going to do is in CSS, we specified opacity values in order to hide and show one of them. So for example, if I add a few items into our cart, and going to add more than enough items, so when we check our cart, we can see that the bottom fade overflow is already there by default. However, when the user tries to scroll down, the white fade overflow should start to appear, and then when the user scrolls to the bottom, completely at the bottom of the user cart, the bottom fade should disappear, but the white fade should stay. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an if statement. So we're working with opacity value, so instead of creating the value that is chosen is based on the same property, only that it will be given different values. And because the same property is going to be worked on, we are just going to create a ternary statement, or just a one-line if statement. So we want to change the top fade opacities, the opacity value, and what value it will be determined on the condition. So we're going to create our condition here. So we want to know if user cart's scroll top value is not 0, then that means the opacity value should be 1. However, if it is 0, if it is true, if this is false, then that means the value should be 0. So this is for truth, the truth value, and the false value. So this is like an if statement, and then this is like the else statement if it was an if statement. And then we're going to do the same for the bottom fade. However, we're going to use a different condition. So this time, we want to know whether the user has scrolled down to the bottom. So we need to collect 3 things, including user card's scroll top. We need to also collect the full height of the user card, and then we need to also get the value of the scroll height. So for example, this does not return the height of the user card. It just returns the scroll value, but only the top part, and there's no scroll bottom. Scroll bottom does not exist, unfortunately. So we are going to have to calculate what every scroll top is plus the height of the user card will give us the scroll bottom value. So we are going to get the variable once again, and we can access the height of this element using offset height. Since we do not specify an HTML file, we can't use .style.height, so you're going to have to use this property instead. And then we are going to add that to user card.scroll top. So then this gives us the scroll bottom value, since that doesn't exist. And then we want to know if this value, if scroll bottom is basically equal to scroll height. So the scroll height is basically it is not the same as the offset height, but it basically gives us the value, the full value, the full height of the element of user card, including the bottom. Offset height only gets the height of the user card without the scrolling function, because we added overflow hidden, overflow hidden scroll. However, it's like user card scroll height can access the elements, the part of the element that's hidden, and access that part of the height, that part of the element, and can get its full height overall, like including the overflowing part. But offset only gets whatever we declared in CSS, so it cannot access the hidden part, and it can't get the height remaining, basically. So we want to know if the scroll bottom value is basically the same as the scroll height when the user is scrolling, and if so, then that means the true value should be 0, should not be seen. It should not be set to hidden. Otherwise, it should be visible if it is a greater value. If it is a lesser value. So now we're going to test this in here. So now we're just going to add a few items. So I added 2 Freddy fries. So now you can see that when we scroll down, the white fade overflow appears, and then when we scroll right to the bottom fade overflow disappears. So the change from one fade overflow to another is pretty abrupt. So we're going to head over to CSS, and we are going to add the transition property here, and we want the transition to happen for the opacity value. So we can specify the value, opacity, and then what we're going to do is specify the amount of seconds that this transition should go on. So we're going to go with 0.2 seconds, and also both ways when the white fade overflow appears and disappears, when it's set to 0 and 1. So now when we reload our page, and when we add those items back, we can see that the transition is much smoother. So now the white fade scroll effect is completed. Now this was part 1 of the tutorial. Check out the playlist link to access part 2 of the tutorial of the functionality of the shopping cart. Thanks for watching this video. Subscribe to Code Harvest for more videos like this. Give it a thumbs up if you found it helpful, and comment down below. Now see you in the next video. Goodbye.